You spend 12 years in a classroom, exposed to thousands of hours of instruction, and in all that time, nobody once taught you how to actually learn. You were taught history, mathematics, science, and literature. But the one skill that determines how well you absorb everything else, learning itself, was never part of the curriculum. So you did what everyone around you did. You highlighted your textbooks, you reread your notes, you crammed the night before the exam, convinced that effort alone would translate into understanding. In 2013, a team of cognitive psychologists published what would become one of the most cited education papers in decades. Led by John Dunlosky at Kent State University, they reviewed hundreds of experiments spanning years of research, evaluating the 10 most common study techniques used by students worldwide. Their findings should have changed everything. What they found was devastating. The strategies that students rely on most heavily, the very techniques you probably used for years, turned out to be the ones that help the least, not just slightly ineffective, rated at the bottom of every measure of long-term retention. Highlighting, rated low utility. Rereading, rated low utility. The two most popular study techniques on the planet were ranked among the least effective methods of learning ever measured. Years of effort, millions of students, all building on a foundation that science says barely works. And here is the part that should unsettle you. It is not that these techniques do nothing at all. They create something far more dangerous than simple failure. They create the illusion of learning, a convincing feeling of progress where no real progress actually exists. John Dunlosky himself described his own reaction to the findings. He was shocked that the strategies students use most frequently seemed to provide minimal benefits to their learning and performance. The tools we were given were broken from the very beginning. When you reread a passage, something subtle but important happens inside your brain. The words begin to feel familiar. Your mind processes them more easily each time, and somewhere in that growing ease, it makes a critical mistake. It confuses recognition with genuine understanding. It mistakes familiarity for knowledge. Psychologists call this the fluency illusion, and it is one of the most persistent traps in human cognition. And this illusion does not just affect students. 90% of teachers across 11 different countries still believe that students learn best when instruction matches their preferred learning style. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, categories that sound scientific but have been thoroughly, repeatedly, and conclusively debunked by decades of rigorous research. The psychologist Harold Pashler led one of the most rigorous reviews of learning styles research ever conducted. His conclusion was devastating. There is virtually no credible evidence that matching instruction to a student's preferred style improves learning outcomes. Not just weak evidence. Virtually none at all. And yet this myth stubbornly refuses to die. State teacher licensing materials across the United States continue to reference learning styles as though they were established science. The system is literally training a new generation of teachers using ideas the evidence discredited long ago. But perhaps the most humbling piece of evidence is also the simplest. It has nothing to do with specific techniques or styles or teaching methods. It is about what happens inside your brain in the hours after you finish studying, using any traditional method. And the answer is not what you would expect. The forgetting curve, first documented by Hermann Ebbinghaus in 1885, shows that without active reinforcement, you forget roughly 70% of new information within just 24 hours. Within a week, only about 25% remains. The knowledge you worked so hard to absorb quietly drains away while you sleep. All those late nights cramming, all those pages of highlighted notes, all that effort you put in, and your brain was quietly discarding most of it before you even woke up the next morning. Now pay attention to this next part, because what actually works is going to feel deeply counterintuitive. In 1994, the cognitive psychologist Robert Bjork at UCLA introduced a concept he called desirable difficulties. His central argument was radical. The conditions that make learning feel easy and comfortable are often the very conditions that prevent real knowledge from taking root in your memory. What Bjork was really saying is this. The struggle you feel when learning something difficult, that friction, that discomfort, that frustrating sense of not quite getting it, is not a sign of failure. That is learning actually happening. The discomfort is the mechanism itself, not the obstacle standing in the way. And the research supporting this idea is not marginal, it is overwhelming. Retrieval practice, the simple act of actively pulling information from memory instead of passively rereading it, improves long-term retention by 50 to 80% compared to traditional study methods. Not from studying longer, not from working harder, from one single change in how you engage with the material. Picture two students studying the same material for the exact same number of hours. One rereads the chapter 3 times over, the other reads it once, closes the book, and forces themselves to recall everything from memory, struggling through the gaps, getting things wrong, trying again. Weeks later, the second student remembers dramatically more, not because they are smarter, because they studied in a way that forced their brain to actually work for it. As the organizational psychologist Adam Grant has observed, nearly 90% of educators are faithfully following a practice with no scientific foundation whatsoever. We have built an entire system of education around intuition rather than evidence, around what feels right rather than what actually produces lasting knowledge. And this is where it becomes deeply personal. Because we are living through an era where artificial intelligence can retrieve any piece of information in seconds. Knowledge itself is no longer the competitive advantage it once was. The ability to learn, deeply, efficiently, and continuously, that is the skill that separates people who adapt from people who get left behind. For over a century, the evidence has been building. From Ebbinghaus documenting memory decay in 1885, to Bjork proving that difficulty strengthens learning in the 90s, to Karpicke showing retrieval beats rereading in 2011, to Dunlosky's landmark review in 2013, the science has been clear for generations, and the education system has chosen to look the other way. You were never a bad student. You were never bad at learning. You were handed broken tools by a system that did not know any better, and you did the very best you could with what you were given. That is not your failure. That is the failure of a system that refused to update itself. And yet, here is what makes this both frustrating and hopeful. A recent study found that even when students are aware that techniques like retrieval practice and spacing actually work, they still avoid using them. The reason is painfully simple. These methods demand more cognitive effort, more discomfort, and more deliberate planning. Real learning has a cost that most people are simply not willing to pay. So here is the reprogram. Replace highlighting with retrieval, close the book, and force yourself to recall from memory. Replace rereading with spacing, study in short focused sessions spread across days, not hours crammed into a single desperate night. Replace comfort with difficulty, because the struggle is not the obstacle. The struggle is where all real learning lies. You were taught how to perform on a test. Now teach yourself how to actually learn. Reprogram yourself.